this memorial that we're doing here, I have a couple of letters from Mom, one from Mom's brother who couldn't be here, and her best friend Sylvia in Washington, and her cousins who were like sisters to her, and Bert Fisher, who was an evacuee in World War II from London, moved in with Mom and her family during the war. So this shouldn't be too long, but Terry asked me if I would read this letter that he had written. And at the end of it, there's a hymn. It's an old English hymn that the staff's going to play. Tribute to My Sister by Terry Reed, brother of Sylvia Lengerich. First of all, I am sorry that I can't be with you in person today, but have asked Carl to read my tribute to my sister. My sister Sylvia was born in 1936, the year that the then King of England, Edward VIII, abdicated, i.e., gave up his throne. He was seen as abdicating his responsibilities, something that could not be said about Sylvia in any way whatsoever. My sister was almost 12 years older than me. Our parents came from a humble background, very hardworking, often working 2 or 3 jobs to help keep food on the table. Because they were out working such a lot, my sister acted as a substitute mother to me when I was young. She used to take me out on trips and treats, often going to the cinema. She once took me to see Gone with the Wind, and not many years after it first came out. And I didn't, and still don't, have a great attention span. At halftime, after 2 hours, there was an interval. I thought it must be all over and started to leave the building with my sister running after me, hauling me back in. I went to school for the first time when I was 4, and my sister took me on the first day. Halfway through the morning, there was a break, and I thought the school day had ended. And I walked 1.5 miles back home. My sister, needless to say, took me back to school. She may have got me by the ear. I can't quite remember. There were many other incidents where she looked after me in place of my mother, particularly when I was ill. I had a very illness-prone childhood. There was a bond between us that was greater than just brother and sister bond. Moving on, my sister and her longest and closest friend Sylvia, they had been close friends since their early teens, both married U.S. Air Force servicemen stationed in England, John and Mac, respectively. Both Sylvia and Sylvia left for the USA with their new husbands when I was around 11 years old. Despite the 50 or so years that she lived in the States, she never lost her English roots, joining the other GI English brides who lived nearby to form an English society in the USA. And she visited England a number of times with her children. As some of you will know, Sylvia and Celia were third-generation Salvationists, i.e., members of the Salvation Army. When Sylvia married John, she embraced the Catholic Church. This was John's church. She fulfilled her duties and responsibilities in bringing up her children in the Catholic faith, and showed, by example, and by using her immense motherly wisdom, the right way for them to live their lives. Sylvia was an inspiration not only to her children, but to others she came into contact with. She was very generous with her time, inviting people to share their problems with her. After a moment's contemplation, she would come up with some wise words suggesting the way forward to help various people with their problems. My sister and I never had a cross word or argument throughout our entire life, although I would get some stern glares from her if she thought I had overstepped the mark with something I'd done or said. I think there are a few people here today who would also recognize that glare. I am sorry for her last few years were quite traumatic, but she is now at peace with John, and the suffering and pain has gone. I would like to thank the nursing staff at the home, her children and grandchildren, for the way they supported and cared for her in the last few years, and I am sorry I didn't get to speak with her over the last few years due to her illness. My sister was a generous, kind, loving human being who was greatly loved by me and by her children, grandchildren, and great-grandchildren, and she will be sadly missed by us all. Sylvia was truly a remarkable woman. I'd like to conclude with 3 verses from a hymn by a Scottish hymn writer, George Matheson, which I would like to think that my sister would have sung in her heart before her passing. And he also sent an audio recording of it. The next letter is from a dearly close friend of Mom's, who was her sister, Sylvia McKnight. When I think of everything over the last 66 years, everything we've been through together, I'm not real sure that friend is a big enough word to describe what you were to me. You've been the one I've turned to in the highest highs and the lowest lows of my life. You never failed to give me just what I needed, whether it was a comfort, understanding, or a swift kick. You told me it was always, always in just the right words. We had some great times traveling from our first vacation in 1955 to Torquay. How we survived those 2 weeks, I still don't know. That was when we decided we were sisters. To our last just a few years ago, up the New England coast in Canada, great memories. You stuck by me and showed your loyalty in a million ways. We were tried and tested, and yet here we are, still side by side. It will always be that way, because you're so much more than just a friend. You're part of my heart. Next is an email message from Bert Fisher. And like I said, Bert was an evacuee from London. It just so happened that his cousin also lived with Mom and Grandma and Grandpa. And her name was Ivy McNamara. And I knew Ivy as Aunt Ivy. And her brother Frank was off fighting in World War II while Ivy lived with Grandma and Grandpa. Bert says, I would just say that despite the war being harsh, I would just say that despite the war being a harsh time, living with your mom and her mother and father in Leicester as an evacuee was still a very enjoyable time for me. We had a lot of fun with days out to places like Wickstead Park. It made the war seem very remote to me. My love remains with your mom as a sister in those times. Love to you all, Bert. The next letter I'm going to read is from the Sibley clan. It was wrote by Judy. And like I said, they were all so close that they were like sisters. And I don't know if some of you remember, Judy came for Sue and I's wedding with her husband John at the time. And he was the one at the reception that had the red nose, clown nose that he wore. I don't know if you remember that. Our cousin Sylvia, which was much more like a sister to us than a cousin. During our early life, we grew up in a very close relationship with several of our cousins. And with Sylvia, this closeness never changed. It was always there. My sisters and I have many fond and happy memories of the fun and laughter that were always around. My eldest sister, who was close in age to Sylvia and remembers things they did together, even when they were young, she recalls a day when they were playing on a seesaw, or as we know as a teeter-totter, and had been given strict instructions by the kindergarten teacher not to get off without help. But there was nobody nearby when Sylvia wanted to move on to something else, and she decided she could manage on her own. However, as she began to get off, my sister's end of the seesaw bumped down, and Sylvia went up so high that she was thrown into the air and hurt her arm as she landed. Even at the age of 4, she was active, adventurous, and determined. I remember her wedding and the time that she and John lived in a flat in Leicester. It was a sad day for us when she went to live in USA, although it was definitely the right way for her to go. Her happiness was so very obvious. We all looked forward to the times when she came home to see her mom and dad. She seldom came alone, but the closeness and the friendship were always felt. Communication, firstly by letter, airmail of course, kept us up to date with her life, the arrival of the children and other events. Then, as the cost of phone calls reduced, Sylvia and I would spend considerable time on the phone simply putting the world to rights. Our mom was the first of our family to visit her and John, and later they welcomed other family members for a holiday at one time or another. I have extremely good, happy, and fond memories of my visits. Along with my husband, we spent 4 long holidays in Wapakoneta, and during these times, Sylvia and John took us to visit various places. Those times are very precious to me. We had many different experiences together. Sylvia's life was fulfilled in every way. She passed her knowledge, kindness, love, and care to all who knew her. Today, she would want us to smile and be thankful for the life she lived. Although we are all very sad to lose her, we can celebrate her life and be glad for all that she has meant to each and one of us. One thing that I admired about Mom was her power of prayer. She always talked about the power of prayer. And in September 1985, I got orders for Panama. And I'd call home once a week and talk to Mom. And when I told her, I said, Mom, I got orders to Panama. She's like, get them orders changed. You're not going to Panama. I said, but I can't change them. Get those orders changed. You're not going to Panama. So every week I'd call home. She'd say, are those orders changed? And I know she was giving me the look over the phone. And I'd say, no, Mom, the orders aren't changed. I'm going to Panama. Everybody else is going to Korea. I'm going to Panama. She's like, well, you need to get those orders changed. So I came home for Gary and Kay's wedding. Second day home on leave, the telephone rings. And it was a sergeant from Lackland asked to speak to me. When I got on the phone, he said, Carl Lengerich. I said, yeah. He said, your orders have been changed. You're going to Turkey. I don't know where in Turkey. Somewhere. I can't pronounce it. You get your orders in the mail. Go to Right Pat. Get your tickets. Have fun. I got off the phone and I looked at Mom and said, who did you call? And she goes, what do you mean? My orders were changed. Who did you call? And she smiled and she said, where are you going? I go, I'm going to Turkey. She said, good. I said, I'm going to Turkey. Don't know where. I'm going to Turkey for... She's like, good. You're not going to Panama. And I was like, who did you call? She said, I didn't call anybody. I just prayed that you wouldn't go to Panama. That was in 1985. And since that time, throughout the years, up until recently, before she went to the acres, I would try to trip her up. We'd be driving somewhere and I'd be like, who'd you call? And she'd smile. I'd say, no one. I believe in the power of prayer. And I said a lot of prayers and I lit a lot of candles. So needless to say, I didn't go to Panama. And she didn't call anybody. So, you know, there was so much to say and so many people to thank of all the lives that Mom has touched. The last few days I was trying to think of put something together. And got aggravated and I just shut the computer off and I went to bed. Well, before I went to bed, I found an envelope marked My Story. It was in a bunch of stuff that we've got through the last few years. And in it, there was her handwritten writing of her family history in England. I didn't have time to transcribe it, but I will. And in that was another thing that she had. I was trying to figure this one out. It turned out to be a pro and con list of moving from Freiburg, or staying in Freiburg, or moving to Walpaw. And so she must have took considerable time to think about it. And one thing on there, she thought about her friends and their age and how it was hard for them to get to her. And her to get, how it was getting to be to get to the stores net. So she decided to move to Walpaw. So, and also I found a letter that she wrote. And I started reading it. And I feel it just kind of sums up the type of person that Mom was. Because in Terry's letter he mentioned about how she was a sister to a lot of people. And a lot of people feel that she was a sister. And so I transcribed this letter that I found. And it was dated 1/6/1999. It says, "Friends, in the early 1970s, my husband's best friend introduced me to his lady friend. And I say lady instead of girl. To me, she was a lady with a capital L. Her name was Mary Lou. She was born in Johnstown, Pennsylvania, and she moved to Ohio, I believe, in the 60s. When I met her, she was divorced and had 3 girls, 2 of whom were almost growing up. Eventually, she married my husband's friend, who had 4 girls. 7 girls in the family. Wow, what an undertaking. From that day on, together, we had many adventures and misadventures. We found we had a lot in common. We had both, until our teens, gone to church and were in the choir, as well as being Sunday school teachers. We both worked as teenagers. I found that we could talk well together, and did. Both of us were there together in times of crisis. I miss her. Mary Lou always wanted a Cadillac. Eventually, she bought one after years of older cars. It was a blessing. Before the Caddy, many times she would call saying, "I'm stuck someplace. Would you pick up the girls from school?" One time I received a call, "Meet me at the truck stop." Her car had stalled on the freeway and she left it in the median. We used to call her Secondhand Rose. We would always dress up and go out for dinner and a show. After one particular show, it was a very cold night. She put the window down and it would not go up. There we were, wondering if we would freeze to death before getting home. We would make light of the situation as always and have a good laugh. One time, her and I and 7 children between us went to a wedding all in one car. And we couldn't find the church. Eventually we found it, only to have to stand outdoors, as it was a small church. I don't remember having an angry word between us. We had lots of discussions on trials and tribulations, etc. Mary Lou collected discount coupons for restaurants. I remember standing in the KFC with her, and she had Wendy's coupons. Both restaurants being adjacent, we just stepped over, leaving the car at KFC. On a trip to Bryan, Ohio, she asked me to go along. It was a Thursday. She was looking to buy a piece of furniture or something. Anyway, we were hungry, but between us, we only had a couple of dollars. We sorted through lots of coupons, finding she had Ponderosa coupons. She had eaten previously at Ponderosa, and the steak was terrible, hence the complimentary coupons. We always seemed to come out smelling like a rose. Sometimes we didn't have enough money for dinner before a show, so we'd have ice cream sundaes after. And I just read that letter, and it was just, how much fun that those two had. And I know her and Sylvia had fun. And Sylvia told me that first week when they went on their first trip, they were out of money. They spent it all. They got through it. They didn't know how, but they laughed about it. And they got through the trip, and they had a great time. And they traveled many places. And, it's just, at times, they didn't have much, but they had each other. Mom had us, we had Mom, we had Dad, we had family. And a couple of the cousins were talking about the barbecues and the get-togethers. Mom loved not NASCAR, the Indy 500. And I can remember a couple of Memorial Days having a big barbecue out there at Freiburg, and everybody was there. There's one thing I'm going to end it on. Back in March of 1988, while on duty stationed in England, I had wrecked on a four-wheeler and broke my back, was choking, and my now best friend, Brent Culver, who I was visiting out at that munitions area, saved me. And there's many times that I've tried to thank Brent for saving me, because if it wouldn't be for Brent, I wouldn't be standing here today. I wouldn't be married to Susan. I wouldn't have that little bundle of joy. And Brent stayed in the Air Force, and I got out, and he had a good career. And I didn't know this. He invited me down. We always kept in contact. He invited me down for his retirement. And there was a colonel asked me what I thought about the letter that Mom sent to him. And I'm like, what letter are you talking about? And so he showed me the letter. And then the colonel explained that the last half of Brent's enlistment, he became a special agent with the Air Force. He did a lot of things. And one thing, he went on several missions after 9/11. And his job was to go out when the IEDs blew up, to go outside the wire to secure the base and try to figure out who put the bomb together. And he did tell me it was amazing how they could tell who put the bomb together. And many people, soldiers and airmen, once they left that base, didn't make it back. So Brent always had that letter that Mom had sent him back in 1988. And he would read that letter before they would go on missions, because he had about 20 people he was in charge of. And he always thought back to Mom. And he had met Mom when Sue and I got married in
95.
Thank you. 1995. And he was amazed. He was amazed when he met the Lengerich clan and everybody else in that, friends and family, and the kindness. He said him and Dad talked for quite a while, and he said Mom treated him like a son, and that just impressed him. And so before the missions, he made a promise before they left the States that he would bring his people back and alive. And he did several tours in Afghanistan and several tours in Iraq. And before each time leaving on a mission, he would read this letter. And thankfully, everybody under his care came back home. The letter to Brent goes like this. April 4th, 1988. Dear Brent, we would like to thank you from the bottom of our hearts for saving our son Carl. We will remember your name forever. At that time, I was going through a difficult time with the illness and death of my father. Also away from my family back in the States. I don't think I could have dealt with what would have happened to Carl if it wasn't for your thoughtfulness for another human being. Thank you again very much. Enjoy your stay in England. Yours sincerely, Sylvia and John Lengerich. P.S. If you are ever in the area, look us up. And he says there was something about that letter that he would promise to bring his people home. And he did. And he's retired. And I spent a couple weeks with him. He was in the hospital in ICU. And he was totally surprised when I walked through the door. He had no clue I was coming. And the first thing he talked about was, how's your mom doing? And I told him it's not good. And she's been battling with dementia. And he said, well, give her a big hug for me. He said, because whatever's going to happen is going to happen. And he's doing well. And he would have been here tonight, but he couldn't travel. And he sends his best to us, the family and friends. And that's the way I don't know if some people at work kind of look at me, and because when you become a friend of mine, you become family. And I got that from Mom and Dad. And Mom got that from Grandma and Grandpa Reed, because they took in several people when she was growing up. I'm going to end it with that. and say thank you for coming out and supporting us. And Louise, could you play? And I totally forgot what it is. Let there be peace on earth. Is that?